Ashcroft was en route to Milwaukee today. And now with the planes grounded, he's going to have to communicate by phone. They have an internal communication system at the Justice Department that they use in situations like this, video monitors. But again, everyone is dispersed, and with the planes grounded, this created a scenario that they, quite frankly, hadn't seen before.
It is the grounding of the planes which pretty much brings to a halt. I mean, one assumes that Air Force One with the President is already on its way back to Florida. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. ABC's John McCarthy is on a cell phone at the moment, and while he cannot hear me, somebody can tell him to start talking, please, and we'll listen. Okay, we'll try that again. Anytime John McCarthy begins to talk and tell us what's happening at the Pentagon, or as much as he knows what's happening at the Pentagon, we will simply let him go. But it's just very difficult to get through on cell phones. Thousands of people trying to find out where their friends and their relatives are. Thousands of reporters, news organizations, of city organizations, state organizations, federal organizations, trying to understand not only what happened today, which in some respects is secondary, but to get something done. And there's just so much agitation around. You get a report just a couple of moments ago from the security at the Capitol Police saying that they believe a hijacked plane may be bound for the Capitol. There's an intensity in the air and a fear and a trauma in the air at 20 minutes to 11 Eastern Time in the United States, 20 minutes to 8 on the West Coast, or in the western part of the United States. The day has just beginning, and all of this has happened in just under an hour. The first attack on the Trade Tower was just before 10 o'clock. The second one came at 3 minutes after 10. We have a strike on the Pentagon, which came a little after that, and the country is just riddled. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, I'm sorry. The country's just overrun, as it's inevitable it would be with rumors. I'm curious, John, in terms of the emergency operation that you monitor, are they in a sense of panic? Are they or just in a sense of chaos?
In a sense of chaos. There was a brief sense of panic, which is understandable when the first tower collapsed. By the time the second tower collapsed, they were prepared for it. There were numerous other injuries. The level of coordination is incredible. The FDR Drive, which is a main artery, has been shut down for the purpose of keeping it clear for ambulances to go to hospitals. They've anticipated that the lower Manhattan hospitals in New York City will fill up, so they have started to arrange helicopter flights to go to hospitals further out in the circle. They've really been pretty well coordinated throughout this. If you can possibly be coordinated during a series of spontaneous events that amount to disaster.
This is war, and war by another definition. We did manage to get Rebecca Cooper, one of our reporters, on the phone from the White House. That's how difficult it is at the moment to communicate. Rebecca, do you hear me? Rebecca Cooper at the White House, do you hear me? All right, the same case with Rebecca's is with John McCarthy at the Pentagon. If we do hear from them, we'll simply interrupt and let them get on talking. Yeah, Rebecca, do you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I hear you. I'm in the basement of the 815 Connecticut Avenue. It's a building across the block from the White House, across the park. You know where that is, next to the Chamber of Commerce. I had to come down here because, as you said, none of the cell phones are working. I'm in the engineer's office, and they've given us their phones to use. There's a real dichotomy here at the White House, Peter. Tourists who still are not fully aware of what's happening across the nation are standing there watching with curiosity. They keep getting moved back, but those of us who are inside the White House realize the severity of the situation. I was inside the White House this morning trying to gather information for you when we were told by a very nervous White House security staff that they feared a plane was headed to the White House, and we heard planes indeed overhead, and they quickly evacuated all of us out of the White House. Now, I just got off the phone with my own crying mother who was very worried about where I was, and I will tell other mothers and fathers of people who work at the White House and reporters who work at the White House that most of the White House has been evacuated. In fact, in the building where I am now, people have cordoned up other offices to try and coordinate the federal response to this. There are actually phone calls being placed to the legal counsel of the FAA from this building because they don't have cell phone connections. They are out of their offices. They are doing a good job of coordinating the federal response from here, but they are having to take all kinds of emergency measures to coordinate this response. But even the White House chef, who just days ago was preparing a lovely state dinner for President Fox of Mexico, I saw him and I tried to speak to him, and frankly, Peter, he was too rattled. He said he couldn't speak, and he was with his staff, and they were all very anxious and very worried because, of course, they did know what's going on in the country today.
Many thanks, Rebecca Cooper. And if you just see that picture that was going by as Rebecca was talking, you get a real sense of what the urgency was in the White House. First of all, the White House police came walking out, and then people began to run out of the White House. In and of itself, astonishing, because we live with the notion that if there is any place in the United States which is fiercely protected, including an anti-aircraft battery, at least one on the roof of the White House itself, this is the place where the President and the Vice President, of course, are to be secure. Claire Shipman is on the phone from the White House. Claire, we are now looking at what appear to be fairly relaxed security officers on the roof of the White House, looking at in the distance as they always do, talking occasionally to each other. There doesn't seem to be a high level of tension there. What's it like on the ground?
Well, there's considerable tension on the ground, Peter. We are actually looking at a similar picture because we're across the street from the White House now in the Hay Adams Hotel. The entire area around the White House has been completely evacuated. It's very quiet. The police seem tense. They're carrying automatic weapons. We've also seen a couple of what appear to be fighter jets overhead. Everybody in this area has been sent home from all major government offices. It's a reverse commute. The highways, we're told, are just jammed. As you know, President Bush is on his way back to the White House. They've checked his plane considerably before sending him on his way. But as you mentioned, these guys on top of the White House roof are almost always here, and ever since that incident a few years ago when a plane actually landed on the White House lawn, they've upped security measures so that they wouldn't have any other aircraft nearby. And that may be why they seem a little more relaxed than other areas around town. As you know, the AP has been reporting that there was a car bomb that went off at the State Department, and a lot of people are talking about that. And there's also been some report that there were bomb threats on Capitol Hill, but we're still trying to find out more about that, Peter.
Thanks very much, Claire. There are indeed reports from the Federal Aviation Administration that there are possibly one or two more planes that have been hijacked this morning and are still missing. When you think of the number of aircraft that crisscross the United States, not to mention fly overseas every day, this is the Pentagon. This is the Pentagon. This is live coverage from the Pentagon now, which gives you some sense of the force with which this aircraft, described to us as a small commuter-sized aircraft, flew into a side of the Pentagon coming from the south this morning. And again, the communications in the country are so difficult at the moment, and as you've heard beginning to hear from everybody, the cell phone network is choked for a variety of reasons, that it's hard to get a handle at this point on casualties at the Pentagon or the extent of damage. The one place in which we can be focused, because it is such a small place, Manhattan, 11 miles long, is the Twin Trade Towers, and by some remote chance, if you've just joined us on television, the Twin Trade Towers in New York City have been destroyed, with hundreds, presumably, or perhaps thousands of people in them. Each of the two towers was struck today, attacked today by an aircraft, one of which at least we know was hijacked. And this is the second tower that went just a few minutes ago. A scene of chaos and devastation in the lower part of New York City, right on the edge of the Hudson River. Everybody in the United States is familiar with the Twin Trade Towers, and we have no idea whether there were tourists there who show up every morning to go and stand on the top of the trade towers, because it is one of the most expansive views, south, west, and north of the city and the area itself. Bill Blakemore is down there. Bill, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
Go ahead.
I'm just north of Canal Street, just a few blocks north of the Trade Tower area. Throngs of people have been, of course, moving north. Some of them silent, most of them looking stunned, just saying we're just trying to get out of the area after both towers have collapsed. We're seeing Delta-wing jet fighters circling overhead, just one at a time. When the first one appeared, the group of people amid which I was standing shrieked and said, "Oh my God, there's another attack," and then they realized that being a Delta-wing jet fighter, it was probably the U.S. military, which of course it seems to be. There's just a couple of helicopters, apparently police helicopters, circling overhead. And on this very clear morning now, the unusual sight is the lack of the trade towers sticking up above the buildings that are normally here. People have now begun to accept, but just barely begun to accept what's happened. All business at a complete standstill, nothing but sirens down here as these throngs move further and further north, just walking away from what they can barely begin to understand. Peter?
Bill, how far north did this, I mean, we looked at some streets which debris had just gone in a huge, wide area.
Right. I seem to be just north of where that hit. I'm just up at Canal, so there seem to have been enough low-lying buildings, that is no more than, say, 20 or 30 stories high, between us and the base of the tower to have protected people here from the debris. But here's another man walking past me, just looking completely dazed, going north. 2 or 3 other women. The crowds are beginning to thin out now, as most of the people who were just standing around and watching were working there. One woman came up just talking a mile a minute with her daughter and her friend and her daughter, describing how they had gone to their school this morning. She was about to go to the trade tower to pick up something from a shop there when her daughter said, "I want a sandwich, Mommy," and so she stayed back. She said, "Otherwise I would have been there." They're still trying to understand how they're so lucky not to have been over there. There must be thousands of such stories here this morning, Peter, of those that were the lucky ones.
Thank you, Bill. Please stay in touch as often as you can. It's now 10 minutes to 11 Eastern Time, 10 minutes to East in 2 minutes to 8 in the West. And I'm just going to add to the chaos and the trauma of the day by saying that a large plane has now crashed just north, or shouldn't I say just, but crashed about 10 o'clock in the last 15 minutes north of Somerset County Airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. This is reporting from one of the Pittsburgh television stations as a result of a 911 call from the airport itself. There are no other details on this crash yet. And it's not clear whether the crash was related to anything else that has happened in the country today. But the plane, which was believed to be a Boeing 767, crashed about 10 a.m., just about 8 miles east of Jennerston, Pennsylvania. People in the area will undoubtedly be reporting in more clearly to us on that. The New York mayor's race is having a primary today. That has now been canceled. Both on the Republican and the Democratic side, there was I apologize for interruption. Somebody's trying to say something. Go ahead, please. Okay, just stand by just for 1 second.
Fred there?
Yeah, Fred, pick it
The
up.
New York Mayoralty primary has been canceled today, and as we said, there's reaction coming in from the Middle East, including a claim of responsibility, then a denied responsibility, now a message from the Palestinian President Yasser Arafat condemning the aircraft attacks on the World Trade Center and sending the condolences of the Palestinian people to those who have been victimized by it. Outside the Pentagon, another member of our ABC News staff, Chris Dreer. Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Peter.
So would you tell us what you can see?
Yes, Peter. I'm standing at the fringe of Arlington Cemetery watching the Pentagon as the top of it caves in. There's a lot of black smoke, a lot of twisted debris. The Pentagon itself has caved in from the top. There is much fire coming out of the windows. It looks like something from World War II, Peter.
Chris, can you tell me, it's a little hard to tell on television, how much of the building has collapsed? How wide is it? How deep is it? Do you have a sense of that?
Yes, I do, Peter. The center portion of the Pentagon appears to be breached. That is, apparently there's a courtyard, and the of that is completely caved in from where I am, from where I see it.
Okay, I think you're on a cell phone, Chris, but just confirm for me that a portion of the building has been breached and the aircraft appears to have pushed its way through into the courtyard?
Yes, indeed it has. I believe, Peter, that that's where the plane is, but I am not sure at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Is there any evidence, is there any movement around there at the moment? We're looking at a fairly static picture. Are there people arriving, people disappearing,
yes,
ambulances coming?
Peter, there's a great deal of glass and wind fire coming out of the windows, but on the other side of the Pentagon is where most of the emergency vehicles are now. I'm going to try and get around to that side to see what I can see.
Okay, thank you very much. I should tell you that all military personnel in the District of Columbia area now, all military personnel in the district, are now on something that is called Threat Level Delta, which is the highest state of alert in the military, and all other military personnel in the country are now on alert status Charlie, which, John Miller, we know is a somewhat lower status of alert, but still a reminder that this disaster has spread like wildfire through all of the political and military establishment in the country. All museums and monuments in Washington are now shut for the day. It's ironic to hear Claire Shipman telling us there that tourists are still standing around waiting to get into the White House today. Not surprisingly, unfamiliar perhaps with what has happened everywhere else, though, as it was, for example, when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, word spread dramatically, mouth to mouth, person to person across the country in a huge wave of information and emotion and confusion. And now...
Good morning, I'm Del Walters in the ABC 7 News Studios. We are interrupting ABC's coverage to bring you up to date on the developments that are happening here in Washington. I'm joined by Carol Costello. Safe to say that Washington is in a state of high alert. We are receiving a report that, as you heard Peter Jennings say, that all of the government buildings in Washington, all of the employees in the government buildings in Washington have been told to go home. All of the museums have been closed.
Including the National Zoo.
Including the National Zoo. And as you can hear, basically, we don't know at this point what buildings may or may not have been targeted by these terrorists, and that is the reason for this extraordinary activities. We have a reporter on the phone right now from the Capitol, Horace Holmes. Horace, bring us up to date as to what's going on there.
The area, Del, around the Capitol has been totally sealed off. We're standing on the corner of Independence and Washington Avenue. About a 4 or 5 block area around the Capitol has been sealed off. Police just not letting any, even people walking on the streets get anywhere near the Capitol building. We have been hearing, and you can probably hear in the background, sirens going. A lot of police activity, police cruisers and paddy wagons and even ambulances traveling at high rates of speed up Independence Avenue. When we arrived on the scene, there were just people everywhere in the streets. All the buildings around the Capitol building have been evacuated, so there are workers at HHS and the FDA and the Department of Education all out in the streets just kind of wandering around asking police officers, where do I go and what do I do, asking them, can I get to Union Station, asking them if the subways are operating. A lot of panic out here in the streets, quite frankly, and a lot of confusion.
Of course, we understand the airports have been closed down in our area. The D.C. Fire Department, Prince George's Fire Department, Alexandria Fire Department, all personnel have been asked to come into work no matter what their shifts. Horace, what about people who just live in the area? They must be afraid, too.
Yes, as a matter of fact, they can't, people who live just in Capitol Hill can't get to their homes right now because police have just totally sealed off this area. We've seen a number of people who say, well, I just live right down the street there, and police are saying, I'm sorry, but we can't let you into the area around the Capitol.
We understand from also the State Department, there were initial reports that a car bomb had exploded there. We understand now that no car bomb has exploded at the State Department, although it has been evacuated. Although at the Pentagon, the plane did hit the Pentagon. Part of the roof has fallen in, but we don't know the extent of injuries there. We don't know if anyone's been terribly hurt because, of course, in these situations, it's very hard to get information. Horace, do you have any information about injuries?
No, have not heard anything about that at all.
Horace, what about with regards to the members of Congress? Have you seen any of them coming, going, or extraordinary measures to evacuate the members of the House and the Senate?
I talked to one gentleman who was in a House Judiciary subcommittee meeting that had just begun when he said there were members of the House in that meeting, and police came in and told them to evacuate. What we've seen, we were over there by the garage at one of the office buildings, and police were escorting members of Congress out of the area at very high rates of speed, obviously.
We want to take a shot of the 14th Street Bridge because it's an odd sight, because usually there's a lot of traffic on the 14th Street Bridge. There was a lot of outbound traffic a little bit earlier. As you can see, people are actually walking across the bridge to get out of the district. Everybody wants to get out of the city for very obvious reasons. That is an eerie sight.
That picture itself is actually a testament to how quickly the District of Columbia was evacuated. This entire tragedy has been unfolding now for about the last 2 hours. About 20 minutes ago, that bridge was packed. Obviously, the last time anybody in the Washington area can remember seeing the city itself clearing out has been one of the snowstorms that we had, the most recent being 1996 when there was gridlock on the streets. But everybody appears to have decided to go home to collect their loved ones. I've talked to people that were in high-ranking government positions who simply said, I have to go home.
Yeah, a lot of things have been closed down, too, for obvious reasons. We want to join Greta Cruz, who is in our newsroom. She has the list for us. Greta.
Okay, well, Carol and Del, the list keeps changing as we speak. This is what we know. You did mention that all federal government offices are shut down, that all of the monuments are closed, the Smithsonian closed, including the zoo, which is farther north in the city. At this point, as far as, let's start with the schools. D.C. public schools are still open. They are meeting right now, officials, to decide whether or not they will be closing D.C. public schools early. At this point, everything is still on. Howard University is closing at noon today. American University in Northwest is canceling all classes this afternoon and this evening. Arlington Public Schools, we are told they're getting lots of calls, obviously. They are going to keep the kids in school. If parents do want to go to the school and pick their children up, they may do so. However, they are not letting the children out early. The University of Virginia, the Northern Virginia Center, will be closing at noon today. And the Corcoran College of Art and Design is now closed. A few other things I will pass along. We were told earlier that BWI Airport is still allowing incoming flights because planes obviously do have to land, although the FAA nationwide is shutting down airports, but some of them will remain open to allow flights to land. Metro is still open, folks. We are told, however, that the Pentagon station has shut down because of the fire and the problems out there, but for the rest of the system, the subway system is open. It is crowded, obviously. We are in pretty much a reverse commute in the city of Washington right now. The streets are open, the bridges are open, except for those secured areas we told you, Horace Holmes, around the Capitol. Many of those streets will be shut down because police have cordoned them off as a safety measure. The stretch of 395 Shirley Highway by the Pentagon is also shut down because of the fire out at the Pentagon. We understand that D.C. Mayor Tony Williams is at the Reeves Center downtown. That is with the command center. He is fine. Everything is in control there. The White House and all the other buildings downtown have been evacuated. And right now we do not have any word on any casualties locally as a result of all of these incidents, but we will keep you posted as more becomes available.
Yeah, Greta,
Back to you.
Greta, we just got off the phone with an Air Force spokesperson. He says he has no idea if anyone was killed inside of the Pentagon. Of course, we will be trying to effort that information.
I also want to add, too, we did get a request, and I don't know if you mentioned this or not, that D.C., Prince George's, and Alexandria are all asking their fire department personnel and their EMS. Everyone needs to report to work today immediately, regardless of their schedules. They're going to need every man and woman possible today.
And Greta, I think it's safe to say that even though no state of emergency has been declared, we are in a state of crisis. And if you are out there listening and you are a nurse, you are a doctor, you are a member of an EMS squad, a firefighter, or a police officer, it stands to reason logic. Phone your commander, your base, and simply report in for duty. We still don't know whether or not we have seen the worst. Like the rest of the nation, we here in Washington are bracing ourselves. We are hoping, we are praying that we have. But we are going to return right now to ABC News, where they continue to cover not only the events here in Washington, but also the events that are unfolding around the nation, because we are fearing now that this may have escalated even further. We join ABC and Peter Jennings right now.
Certainly have focused on bin Laden as the bête noire and as the architect of terrorism against U.S. officials, U.S. citizens. But in this case, the resources and the coordination and the direction to do these kinds of events requires capabilities beyond any one single group. In other words, there had to be cooperation, possibly with some state support, to do this kind of thing.
Okay.
I mean, we've been hearing for the last 2 months that bin Laden was getting ready to do something, but I don't think anyone was looking here as the object of his next event.
Okay, Vince, I much appreciate it, and I hope you go work the beat for us and you check back with us through the day. I'm, by the way, this is not for an immediate discussion, but I'm sitting next to John Miller of ABC News, who you've heard often this morning. He's one of the only reporters in the world to have gone to see Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. And as the day goes on, we'll clearly deal with this in even greater depth, John, than at the moment. But what we are now dealing with is a devastating human tragedy as the result of terrorism in New York City and in Washington, D.C. And just before I talk to John Cox, well, I'm more than happy to listen to these people on the street if we can possibly hear from them. But just in case, by some remote possibility, at 8 o'clock Pacific time, along the West Coast, you've just turned on your television or you're continuing to watch it, let me just review for you where we think we are at the moment. Because it is both a tragedy that has revealed itself before the eyes of millions of people in the country watching on television, and a complete mystery as to how, as we heard from Vince Canistraro just a moment ago, how this could have happened in such a coordinated way without any of the intelligence service of the United States having much a clue about it. So just before 9 o'clock this morning, just at about 8:50, an aircraft, which we now believe had been hijacked and flew into a building, and then shortly after that, that was at 9 o'clock, or just after it, showed up on the wire services about 9:04. We could see it happen live on television as a second aircraft hit the other tower of the twin trade towers in New York City. Thousands of people had just arrived at work. As time passed, we understood that these aircraft had been, we believed, hijacked in both instances. Perhaps certainly one, an American Airlines aircraft which was destined for Los Angeles, had been hijacked and flown. Pilot either forced to fly, very hard to believe, and of course we'll never know unless they find the black boxes from these aircraft, or somebody on board that aircraft killed or got rid of the pilot and went to the controls and flew the plane into the building themselves. And then as much of the country began to connect and try to grapple with this, then we had this horrifying circumstances of first one of the towers, this is the second aircraft flying in, then first one of the towers and then the other tower collapsing on itself with, at the very least, hundreds and probably thousands of people who did not manage to get out of the building after the two initial collisions. And the country, the political and military establishment of the country just began to lock down very quickly. First of all, there was concern at the White House because outside the west side of the White House, behind the Executive Office building, we then began to see that there was fire, and that was what appears now to have been an attack on the Pentagon. Just shortly thereafter, this was this other tower of the Pentagon, the first tower of the Pentagon, which began to fall down upon itself. The World Trade Centers, of course, is what I mean. Thank you. Just stay out of my ear for a second. I'm trying to bring people up to date on the order of which things happened. So we then had New York City's airspace all around locked down. The airports closed down at LaGuardia and Newark and John F. Kennedy. Nobody was allowed to take off. And then shortly after that, the Federal Aviation Administration became involved and told aircraft nowhere in the country to take off. And then all aircraft flying anywhere in the country, because there was so much concern, and there is still some, that there is an aircraft somewhere out in the country which has been unaccounted for. All aircraft in the country were ordered to land immediately at the nearest airport. And then, of course, the second devastating thing at the trade towers themselves, when the second trade tower collapsed on itself. The president was in Florida, and the president down in Florida today to talk about education came very quickly to the cameras, clearly as shocked as any of us in the rest of the country. He talked to the FBI and others. He immediately canceled his education trip to Washington today, to Florida today, and said he was going to come back to Washington, which is exactly what the country expects of him. And he said very briefly on camera that this terrorism against the United States will not stand. As we've said before, the kind of thing he had to say. And John Cochran went to Florida with him. And John, I think you're still in Florida and the president came home. Is that my understanding?
That's right. We're grounded like all other Americans. The airport here is closed to us. The president is on his way back. But we don't know where he's going to land. You know, normally, Peter, the president would land at Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland, a military base, a secure base just outside of Washington, D.C. However, network camera crews have been barred from going to Andrews Air Force Base. It apparently has been roped off and barred to news media. We do not know if the president is going there, and the White House is being very close-mouthed about it. And you can understand why they would want to create the question in some people's minds as to where the president will land. We've been told that when the president returns, he will have a National Security Council meeting. But where will that happen? Will it be in Washington? I can't help but think back to November 22nd, 1963, the assassination of John Kennedy. At that time, the Secret Service was in a great hurry to get the new president, Lyndon Johnson, back to Washington, D.C., a safe place. It's no longer clear today that Washington, D.C. is such a safe place, Peter.
Thank you very much, John. Please stay in touch and let us know when you can make your way to Washington. The uncertainty in Washington has led authorities to ask the political leadership in the Congress, we know at least in the Senate, to go to a safe location. Earlier reports about a bomb outside the State Department, we believe, are now not correct. But there was this attack on the Pentagon, and there's this mixture in Washington of deep, profound tension and almost and alertness. You certainly get a quick glimpse there of the security force, which is a constant presence on the roof of the White House, on guard there. But there is a natural instinct, not only for the president to go to Washington, not merely for the security, because it's the nation's capital, and it's where all of us in the country will look to the president for leadership and response in the hours and the days ahead, and it'll be maybe a couple of hours yet before the president gets to Washington. Meanwhile, on the ground, we have people of all persuasion, eyewitnesses, journalists on the ground, who have been party to seeing this thing and are beginning to piece together for us the human dimension of how horrendous this is. And this, of course, is Times Square, in which you can imagine that people have stopped, and this happens to be the ABC News screen in Times Square, which at a time like this, as Times Square has always been for more than a century, it's always been a place where people gather to see the news. But Drew Milhon, ABC News' Drew Milhon, actually saw this happen, and I believe, Drew, you're on the phone at the moment, am I correct?
Yes, Peter, I'm here.
Would you go ahead?
Sure. I was at the corner of Varick and Canal, which is about 10 to 12 blocks north of the World Trade Center, where roughly 300 to 400 people were gathered watching the flames and the smoke from both World Trade Centers going through the air. And I began to cross the street, and I heard a collective scream from this group of people. And I looked up, and the first World Trade Center that collapsed was falling down. The shriek lasted for quite a long time, and then many of these people fell into tears, just crying and sobbing. I don't know where my mother is. I don't know where my friends are. That sort of thing was heard all around this crowd.
Okay, Drew, where are you at the moment? You're in the same location?
Yes, I am. I'm at Varick. I'm just north of that now. I'm at Varick and Canal.
And people are not familiar, people from outside New York are not familiar, but you're at the lower west corner of the island of Manhattan. And is that whole lower part of Manhattan being either evacuated or people just leaving it en masse?
It is being evacuated. No cars are allowed south of Canal, which is basically the last major thoroughfare that goes east to west on Manhattan. After the first Trade Center went down, I tried to get closer to the scene, and police and FBI agents were telling everyone, both plainclothes policemen and uniformed policemen were telling everyone they had to go north of Canal. They were pushing everyone back.
Okay, thank you very much, Drew Milhon. Please check in with developments. I can tell you that the reports that we now get from a variety of places, let me just stay with the map of New York City, because the New York City Emergency Management Center is, if you're looking at that map, is just like on the tip of the building there to the north. Both those buildings have gone. And at a moment like this, they and the political establishment in the city, as well as the state and federal authorities, would coordinate operations from in there. And there are other, as you look around that, Manhattan itself, as far up as the Williamsburg Bridge and beyond, of course, is the United Nations. People have always been concerned that at least two of the tunnels, the Holland Tunnel for one, the Lincoln Tunnel is not on that map, but these are the tunnels that go across the Hudson River to New Jersey and out onto the west, and that even perhaps the bridges. But elsewhere in the city, City Hall would be vulnerable as well. The United Nations, the tunnels, and of course FBI headquarters, which is about in the middle of Manhattan, not too far from the New York Stock Exchange, which you cannot see on that map at the moment. But there was nothing, John Miller's with me still, thank you very much, and I'm glad you are, nothing more patently, obviously vulnerable than the trade towers.
Or no larger set of symbolic targets. It's what they mean. They stand for American commerce. They stand for the American establishment, and in some way, just by their size and profile, American might. And the fact that they were an earlier target and that they withstood that, I think, made them even a more attractive target the second time around.
You can see people, and again, I'm not quite sure what we're looking at here, and I wish somebody put pictures up. Okay, this is clearly a New York fire rig, and communications are extremely, extremely difficult, as you can imagine, in a circumstance like this.
One of the things
sometimes what you get is a picture that is either taken from a different angle or of a different thing.
One of the things they're grappling with here is what is the crime scene. They've been talking about that today. The crime scene unit responded expecting that they'd have a massive crime scene, the World Trade Center tower, then two towers. Then the two towers collapsed, making their crime scene not only much more difficult to process, but massive. Consider the prospect of sifting for evidence, trying to find the black boxes, the in-flight recorders, evidence of other explosives there.
Let me stop for just a sec, John. We'll come back to the notion of crime. But ABC's John McWethy is at the Pentagon. John, can you hear me? Jack, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Peter.
John McWethy, just go ahead and tell us what you know, what you've seen, how much information have you been able to put together?
Peter, this is one of those things that you dream of in your worst nightmares. It appears that a large jet aircraft, perhaps the size of a large passenger plane, came very low, clipping off light poles as it approached the Pentagon. It slammed into the side of the Pentagon, and it drove itself from the outer ring all the way to the inner ring. The area of the building that it went into burst into flames. There are many, many floors of destruction deep into the heart of the Pentagon. That area has now collapsed. The firemen have been there trying to put out the flames. There are obviously heavy casualties at the Pentagon. There have been ambulances and helicopters coming and going for the last hour. The area has been cordoned off. The skies above the Pentagon, there have been F-16s circling. The entire area has been evacuated. More than 20,000 people work in the Pentagon, Peter, and this is a disaster.
John, at ground level, for example, in the side of the building where the plane penetrated from the outer ring to the inner ring, Do you know precisely what goes on in that section of the building?
I do not, Peter. That is not where the highest-ranking people are. The Secretary of Defense and most of the chiefs of the services are on a different side of the building, but in a way it almost doesn't matter. There are going to be many high-ranking people from the Defense Department who are going to be either injured or killed in this attack.
And, John, is this something which the Pentagon is trying to take care of wholly itself? I mean, are we talking to you about a circumscribed military operation to emerge from this chaos?
It's very difficult, Peter. The FBI is here, local police are here, everyone is here trying to deal with the casualties initially and trying to make sure there isn't a second strike of any kind. That's the first inclination. That's all I can tell you at this point.
All right, let me ask you, John, because you cover intelligence and counterintelligence a lot of the time, trying to see that a second strike doesn't occur. How is the Pentagon defended in any way, and in any way similar to, for example, the anti-aircraft battery on top of the White House?
No, Peter. This Washington, D.C., because it is a democracy, has made a lot of decisions about how it is going to posture itself. And local law enforcement, FBI and CIA, have relied on intelligence as a way to defend the United States, and they're going to have to add some measures as a result of this.
And John, as it may be too chaotic at the moment to be talking to people about what is an intelligence failure this morning, and the intelligence services are going to have an enormous amount to answer for, clearly, at least in the public arena. Are you picking up anything that suggests anybody has the vaguest idea of who may have done this?
They are going back over every strand of intelligence, looking for either groups in the Middle East or anywhere else in the country. They learned a painful lesson after Oklahoma City, not to jump to conclusions. They're trying not to do this. But, Peter, there are very few organizations on the planet that could put together the kind of coordinated attack that we have seen today. That points most initial fingers at Osama bin Laden that has the money and the sophistication to do this.
Okay, John, thank you very much. I don't think we should be at all surprised that Osama bin Laden moves to the top of everybody's list in this. But John McCarthy makes a very interesting point, which we should talk to John Miller about this for a moment, which we should consider throughout the day. I remember sitting in this exact same chair at the time of the Oklahoma City bombing, and we all thought it was a Middle East attack. We all thought it was the Arabs attacking the United States, and that's where much of the violence is these days, but it was a sort of knee-jerk reaction, then it turned out to be one of our own.
That's right, and it was a conclusion that was jumped to by the law enforcement establishment because it seemed to fit the pattern of conduct, a massive truck bomb. The difference was it was stateside, yet they were certainly surprised when they learned within days, actually with a car stop of Timothy McVeigh, that it was a homegrown plot. These are bellwether events. When the World Trade Center blew up in New York City in 1993, everybody sighed and said, well, we said it couldn't happen here, and it finally has. When Oklahoma City blew up, they said, we knew it could happen here, but we never thought it would be brought on by our own. This event certainly transcends either of those events by several-fold, and of course, as you pointed out, people are already jumping to speculative conclusions, but whoever is behind this put together an incredibly sophisticated program. Just the idea that you would have multiple operators in multiple cities with the ability to get onto a plane with either the weaponry or false weaponry or explosives to be able to pull off a hijacking, again, probably with a locked cockpit.
3 of them, maybe.
Again, a hijacking and another hijacking and another, and maybe one that's still aloft, that you would be able to, and this is the part that has confounded me, and you touched on this, how do you make a pilot in a plane full of passengers into a suicide pilot, a kamikaze to slam into a building? And if you do not, how do you, as the terrorist, have the level of sophistication to take over the controls of a sophisticated airliner jet plane to be able to fly accurately into targets like hitting dead center into the Pentagon, which is a low below a building.
You heard John McCarthy saying knocking down telephone poles as it came along.
Dead hits into the World Trade Center, one at the center, one near the top. As you pointed out, there's a lot of mystery to this, confounding mystery, an incredible scope.
Let's listen to this woman quickly. Well, we try to listen to this woman, not able to get her sound. Could somebody please turn up her sound if that's possible? We are looking at, in some cases here, because of the communications difficulties, but also the communication benefits we get from our ABC affiliate here in New York City. We're getting coverage which comes from a variety of sources.
What you're seeing is West Street there, a block north of the World Trade Center. That was an emergency service police officer collapsing on the street.
Let's listen to this man. Okay. Can I just ask our director to come to us for just a second then? I think it... Mr. Goodman? Thank you very much. Let's just continue to review. There's a hard issue here for an enormous number of people. What you've seen on television this morning, those twin trade towers first being hit and then collapsing before our A's, has an almost distant, we talked to both Pierre and John, it has one distant quality to it because we're watching on television. We're so accustomed to violence on television. So accustomed. I mean, when the plane flew into one of the two towers which we saw before our eyes, you thought, well, you know, it's like the graphic artist, isn't it? So what we haven't had here yet is an appreciation of the suffering that's occurring on the streets and in those buildings.
Well, what the widening scope of the injuries, they have now notified hospitals in the outlying boroughs outside Manhattan, and they have cleared routes through the streets, covering miles for caravans of ambulances to bring the injured out as they do the triage. The lower Manhattan and central Manhattan hospitals like Bellevue quickly filled up very early on. They have now set up a system of helicopters, which they have to be very careful with because of the ban on air traffic, that everybody knows who everybody is who's flying and that there's communications between all of them to shuttle people out. The military has offered military aircraft for that kind of transport, and military surgeons have been brought to the scene. One thing unfolding right now is they've asked for gas to be shut off in that area for blocks and blocks, because after the two collapses, gas mains were opened up and there's a gas leak in the air which only fosters the danger of yet more explosions.
Exactly. Pierre?
Well, one of the things that they've been very concerned about in recent years is the notion that could hospitals deal with massive amounts of casualties like this. And now they're going to...
Let me just interrupt you for a second so we hear it as it's happening.
Just come out, we're walking.
Just come down. The second everyone's being asked to get down, come down. The people are now panicking again.
Give him in. Give him in. You can walk. You can film it. Yeah. Make a hole. Make a fucking hole. Make a fucking hole. Make a fucking hole. Fuck off.
Well, scene has been repeated hundreds and hundreds, and maybe, as far as we know, thousands of times. The reports in John Miller was talking about the number of hospitals and the military making its medical staff available to the citizen, to the layman hierarchy here. We've had reports from various hospitals saying that hundreds of people are burned from head to toe. One doctor at St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan just simply said the place was crowding up very quickly by people who had been burned. And the horrifying magnitude of all this is to be reminded. I think I'm going to try to get this right, Nancy, but I think maybe as many as 50,000 people work in the immediate area of the Trade Center, of the World Trade Center, in which there are these two twin towers. Am I right on that, that as many as 50,000 people work in?
I don't know the figure, but the World Trade Center complex, not just the two towers, which are, you know, over 100 stories each, but they're flanked by the World Financial Center. So there are clearly tens of thousands of people within a 2-block radius.
And John McWethy, who called in just a short while from the Pentagon, talking about the aircraft that had penetrated the outer ring of the Pentagon to the inner ring, we're talking about the Pentagon now, had many floors of destruction and heavy casualties. It's just impossible at the moment to grasp, other than to try to aggregate the normal circumstances of how many people live and work in the immediate area. And thousands of people work in the Pentagon every day, which has now been overrun by local police and by state authorities and by the military itself trying to take care of its own. Tony Cordesman, who's one of our military analysts, is on the phone from Washington. Tony, what can you add to all this?
Yes. Peter, can you hear me?
Yes, Tony, I can.
I think one of the things we need to understand is we've been preparing for this kind of event for nearly a decade. We've had presidential directives. It's a project called Homeland Defense, but quite frankly, what people were most worried about was the use of weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. Well, we looked at this scenario, hijacked aircraft flying into buildings back in the 60s. It wasn't the focus of Homeland Defense activity. It wasn't something brought up on the screen of the Vice President's office, which formally is in charge with coordinating this effort.
But Tony, you, I know, been party to a lot of these. Is that speaker I hear behind you?
Yes, I'm
Could you just turn around and ask somebody to turn it down?
Hold on, please. I'm on to Peter. Could you turn it down?
Thanks very much. Sorry to interrupt them because they're all doing a job. But your involvement here is important because you've been involved in so much of planning and study of this operation. I don't get it. In the 1960s, yes, we looked at the possibility that people would hijack airplanes and fly into buildings. How did it get off the radar?
I think the problem, Peter, is literally we have tens of thousands of points of vulnerability. As Jack McWethy pointed earlier, it's the Pentagon. It's symbols of our national heritage, like the National Archives. It's major utilities, nuclear power plants, targets like ABC News and the networks. The problem is that anticipating all these points of vulnerability in a democratic society and defending them is almost impossible. There's always been this area of vulnerability, and we've always put civil liberties and civil rights before trying to deal with a comprehensive defense. This may change those priorities. It certainly is something short, if not actually at the level of an act of war.
And Tony, you have seen us this morning, or heard us this morning, go through the ritual of reciting that somebody had claimed responsibility, someone had denied responsibilities. The Palestinian Authority in the person of Yasser Arafat was very quick to come along and offer condolences to the people of the United States, to put as much distance between himself, because he gets blamed for a lot in the Middle East, certainly by the Israelis. Do you have any feel for how complicated an operation this is and who might be able to mount it, or are we just blowing in the wind at the moment?
You're not blowing in the wind at all, Peter. This is so complicated an operation that one reason we weren't ready is that no one believed there was an organization with either the intention or the capability to execute something like this. People talk about bin Laden's group, but it's an umbrella group. It is the elements under it that would have had to do it, not bin Laden himself. We have talked about Iraq, but Iraq's operations have never been particularly sophisticated. We've talked about Iran, but while we can identify that the Iranian leadership was involved in Al-Khobar, we've never seen anything this ambitious. And groups outside the Middle East, like the Japanese Red Brigades, have never come close to this level of operation. I think it's also important to note that we talked earlier about bin Laden being Arab. Bin Laden's operations now have many elements that are not Arab. They are Islamist extremists. They involve groups from countries like Pakistan and other elements. And what we've never seen is a level of coordination among all of these different groups that would lead us to prepare.
Okay, Tony, thank you very much. Very, very grateful to have you here and to remind us all that what has been happening to us all, you know, in terms of being witnesses today to this, and everybody's now gets deeply emotionally involved, the people who've been involved. I can remind you that many thousands of people work in the Twin Trade Towers in New York City, many thousands of people at the work in the Pentagon. There have been 2 aircraft at least today which have gone down with passenger loads on board, and in fact there has been a 3rd crash in Pennsylvania, which I shall bring you up to date on in just a moment. But we've had a written statement from American Airlines this morning, and let me just read it to you, or parts of it as it come. American Airlines confirms it lost 2 aircraft in what it describes as tragic incidents this morning. There was Flight 11, which was a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles with 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots on board. That aircraft was hijacked, to the best of our knowledge, and flown into the trade towers in New York. And Flight 77, a Boeing 757, offering from Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers and 4 flight attendants and 2 pilots. That aircraft is a little more uncertain. That is not a huge, it's a big aircraft, 757, but we're not certain whether that's the one that went into the Pentagon or whether it's one of the other aircraft that went into the Twin Trade Towers. But the government has now shut down the entire air traffic system in the United States. And we learned just a while ago, for example, that all international flights heading to Canada we're now going to be, for the United States, we're going to be diverted to Canada. And the Canadians have now shut down their entire air traffic system as well. A reminder of how close the 2 nations live together, and how Canadian airports from one end of the country to the other are within an hour's flight or less in some cases of major American targets. So now let's get involved with one more crash to start with. ABC's Lisa Stark, who covers aviation, is on the phone with us from Washington, or at least I believe in our bureau. Lisa, can you hear me?
Actually, Peter, I'm in Seattle today, ironically, for an aviation conference.
Okay, well
Can you hear me, Peter?
I can indeed, Lisa, and tell me what you know.
Well, what I know is that the flight that went down outside Philadelphia, I believe, in Pittsburgh, was United Airlines Flight 93. It was a Boeing 757. It was en route from Newark to San Francisco. I do not know how many people were on board that plane. United is also saying now that they are concerned about a further flight that apparently is still missing. Flight 175, it is a Boeing 767. It was scheduled from Boston to Los Angeles. That flight apparently is still unaccounted for, according to officials from United. So at least we believe there's at least one more plane that may still be flying around, in U.S. airspace. Obviously, Peter, I've also learned that one of the planes that went into the World Trade Tower was tracked by the FAA. They knew, I don't know if they knew it was hijacked or if they just knew something was wrong. Obviously, it had deviated from its flight path. They were able to track it on radar, and they did track it to Lower Manhattan. That is the latest we know about the flight.
Lisa, this may seem an awfully dumb question, but given the fact that the airlines, the major airlines, operate in such an intensely coordinated way, at least with their own operation centers, how is United Flight 175, a 767 from Boston to Los Angeles, thought to be missing and unaccounted for?
Well, all United is saying is that they are, quote, concerned about that flight. What I believe is that probably that flight was hijacked as well. Where it is right now, I'm sure perhaps the FAA, the FBI, and those folks know where it is. We are not being told, but there may still be another plane flying out there that has not yet crashed or landed or whatever will happen to it. But that flight is apparently at least unaccounted for at this time as far as public release. I'm sure someone knows where that flight is.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much then. Lisa Stark in Seattle today. Thought she was in Washington, covers aviation for us. Barbara Starr, one of our principal reporters at the Pentagon, I think, is on the line as well. Barbara? Barbara, do you hear me? Barbara Starr?
Yes, Peter, I'm standing outside the Pentagon. About 10 or 15 minutes ago, we saw 50 to 75 military personnel move onto the helipad. They are stretcher-bearer volunteers. that have been assembled to go in and recover any potentially dead or wounded. And we have talked to an eyewitness who was down on the helipad earlier this morning, where the fire is, of course, still ongoing. He reported seeing more than a dozen wounded personnel earlier this morning. We have seen ambulances carry people off. About an hour ago, we saw emergency medical personnel bringing out a woman and a small child in their arms. So the situation here remains quite unsettled.
Can you describe a little more generally what unsettled mean? Is it calm? Is there chaos?
We have had periods of what can only be described as chaos. About 15 minutes ago, security personnel came through again and told us to start running, to move back, that there was another aircraft moving up the Potomac River from the south at a high rate of speed. Well, that apparently did not occur, and we have now moved back to our original camera position. So the police are quite at a point of quite high tension here this morning, and any little ripple is having them move people back to stay away from the building. They are extremely concerned about another attack and a potential additional explosion. They are taking every precaution.
Understandable. Barbara, the portion of the building that was breached when the aircraft crashed into it, do you know what happens in that part of the building?
Well, we're looking at it right now. Fire trucks are still pouring water more than an hour or better after the explosion onto the flames. This has occurred where the helipad is, a helicopter pad with a small control tower where military helicopters, and including Air Force One helicopters, take off and land regularly. A very senior military official told us he heard an explosion on the 5th floor of the Pentagon, and he believes that that's where the impact was. But looking at the side of the building, you can see smoke and flames, and the building is singed, literally top to bottom. Water is continuing to be poured on the flames by fire companies.
Thank you, Barbara Starr, very much. We've just seen a helicopter flying over the center portion of the District of Columbia. Maybe we can get another glimpse at that. It's gone out of frame now. I am wondering now whether or not we are not possibly looking at the president returning to the White House. Claire Shipman, you've got a pretty decent vantage point over the White House. Is that possibly what we're looking at? Okay, Claire Shipman will get to as much. She's got a very good vantage point over the White House. It does not by any means look like the traditional arrival of the president from Andrews Air Force Base in a Marine helicopter on the south lawn of the White House. And quite frankly, everybody on the roof, with a few remaining people on the roof of the building now. This is a permanent guard. I think we're all in the country familiar with the fact that this is a permanent military installation on the top of the White House, as there is one of the really intense perimeters around that. But I think they would not have been quite so relaxed if the president was returning to the White House. And you heard John Cochran report from Florida a while ago that there is nobody's told him where the president is going to land on his way back. In fact, he does traditionally land at Andrews Air Force Base, and we have no idea precisely where he is going to land. And but there is no doubt at the moment that authorities are on alert from coast to coast still. All air traffic halted. All high-profile buildings in New York City, certainly in the District of Columbia, all of the national buildings have been evacuated. It's certainly been true in Chicago. The Sears Tower of Chicago was evacuated. So were the tallest skyscrapers in Boston, Cleveland, and Minneapolis, and the Space Needle as well in Seattle was closed. Military bases all across the country went on alert, on a variety of stages alert. In Washington, military personnel were put on what's called alert level Delta, which is the highest possible alert status, and military personnel throughout the country were put on Charlie threat level. For people who follow those things, we say them often without knowing what they mean, but they're both pretty high states of alert. There was extra security put in place at the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons and research complex in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They put in extra security at the Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico, and among the other places at Fort Detrick in Frederick, Maryland. this is to give you some sense of the magnitude. We're looking at a limited amount of picture of New York City and Washington, but let me go on with this list of what people did across the country today. In Louisiana, the state police urged all petrochemical and pipeline companies to be on alert. In this particular tension, a target which people who study terrorism believed which was vulnerable. In Los Angeles, all of the police in Los Angeles went on tactical alert and mobilized their anti-terrorist division. You recall before the World Trade Fair, the World Trade meeting that was held up in Seattle, one of the last times the system really worked and everybody efficiently was when they caught a guy coming across the border from British Columbia and Canada with a view to blowing up the Space Needle, I think it was at the time, in the Space Needle in Seattle.
That's what they originally suspected, and then later updated it.
Turned it into something in Los Angeles.
When he began to cooperate, he admitted his plan was to set off a massive bomb inside the terminal of LAX, Los Angeles Airport.
That's right. And what I remember at the time about that, John, which is why everybody in the country is so on edge today, is, here was a guy who was picked up by one agent at one border crossing in the country because he was sweating.
One alert agent who didn't like the fact that he was panicking.
Yeah, okay.
Under questioning.
Let me go back now to the World Trade Center. Just to finish this very quickly. Under orders from the FAA, airports nationwide are now closed all across the country. Anybody's just connecting with the world today and you're planning to go anywhere on an aircraft from one place to another, you can just forget it. So let's go back to the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan on the west side and talk to Don Daler. Don.
Over for New York yet. As you know, this is one of the most densely constructed pieces of real estate in the world, and when the Twin Towers collapsed, it appears that they ignited fires on surrounding buildings. I'm seeing a huge amount of smoke. Just about 15 minutes ago, there was a phalanx of firemen, I would say probably about 50 firemen, moving deliberately into this black cloud of smoke. They disappeared completely into it. Then about 5 minutes ago, there was quite a bit of activity as a number of police officers started moving back individuals as well as firemen who were with their fire trucks away. So they moved the line of demarcation back away from that area. And I can see at least 2 buildings look to be partially involved. Just from my vantage point, I'm about 4 blocks away from where the Twin Towers once stood. Right before the second tower collapsed, when you and John were talking about the concerns over that possibility, Mayor Rudolph Giuliani walked right past me here on Church Street and Duane Street, again about 4 blocks from that area, moving his entourage out of that region. And then just moments later was when the collapse happened. There was a complete cessation of ambulances and any kind of emergency traffic in this area for about 5 minutes. And then slowly I saw 1 or 2 ambulances trickling out of this incredible cloud of dust with debris on top of them. Some of them had broken windshields. There was a police car that came by that looked like the top had been almost completely stove in. And that's one of the most disconcerting aspects this morning has been on this avenue that has been opened up, Church Street. There's just been a trickling of emergency vehicles coming out of that scene and towards the hospitals. I'm not sure how much they've been trapped down in that area or whether they moved away and are going to some of the other area hospitals that don't come by here. But I have not seen anywhere near the number of ambulances leaving the site that one would expect.
Don, let me ask you this. Do you have, and I realize this is a tough one to ask you to speculate about, after the attack occurred on the aircraft, the first aircraft attack on one tower and then the second one, how many people managed to get out of that place before they collapsed? Have you any idea? Would you see a large number, small number?
I saw a river of people at first running when the first attack happened. There were screams. A lot of people were looking up in shock. And then about, I would say, a minute and a half later, there was a steady stream of people moving from closer to that area, running up the streets. Then, of course, as I guess is human nature, a lot of people stopped, feeling that they were maybe far enough away that it was safe, started looking up, talking, pointing, and then the second plane hit. And that, again, caused another stream of panic. As the police started to respond and started to try to clear the streets, there was a very calm, organized evacuation of the southern part of Manhattan. I saw no panic whatsoever. It was very calm. The police were directing traffic, getting all the cars out of this area, getting all the people north. But when the first tower, the one that actually was that you saw, was the second tower hit, but the first tower to collapse, fell, then it was mass chaos. And there were thousands of people running up the streets. This billowing cloud of dust and debris came washing up over here, four blocks away, which only exacerbated the chaos of the moment. And then from then on, from the time that the first tower collapsed, there was just the street here, Church Street, was just full of people covered in dust, holding their handkerchiefs or papers over their mouths to try to breathe, moving northward away from this area. That stream trickled out, and then when the second building collapsed, once again there were more people, but this time when the second building collapsed, I witnessed firemen who were helping one another, struggling up the street, covered in debris. There was a police officer who was being carried by two other police officers trying to get out of that area. So there was obviously a lot of collateral damage with the people around that area. I would say even not just at the base of it, but for them to have gotten to my point that quickly, they would have been injured probably 2.5 blocks away from where the towers fell.
Don, thanks very much. Don't go away, because you've helped us appreciate at ground level what, as I said before, seems almost surrealistic when you look at it on television. In terms of people getting out of the trade towers, do you have any sense at all? Have you heard anything, even anecdotally, from the cops about how many people managed to get out of the building before they collapsed?
No, absolutely not. But you can imagine that the World Trade Centers, I'm not sure how many elevators exactly they have, but I have been in those buildings, and I think there are around 20 elevators in each. If they shut down immediately, you can imagine the people who would be streaming down the fire escapes and the stairwells. There's also, I don't know if it was the case now, but I do know that one of the towers had a major elevator that went all the way to the top that was malfunctioning and has been malfunctioning for at least a month. They've been having a lot of trouble with that. Not that that would have made any kind of difference, of course, once those elevators shut down. As soon as I imagine the fire alarms go on and that kind of thing, it's de rigueur that the elevators are not to be used in that situation. If the elevators go all the way to the top, and that's where the extent of the damage was at the very top of these, there's probably no way that anyone on the lower floors was able to use elevators. So they were all going down the stairwells, and one can only hope that there was quick enough reaction that they did get clear away, that they did not stop at the base.
Thank you, Don, very much. You know, somebody said, looking at the Pentagon this morning, that it reminded them of World War II. Clearly a person too young to remember World War II. But as you look at these scenes, you can feel absolutely clear that you're looking at the results of the United States at war with angry and vicious people who will do in the future, as they have in the past, whatever they can to get at the United States, this huge presence in the world, with any number of enemies in the world, with any number of people who feel the United States has messed up their lives or their countries or their movements or impeded them from something. And so, in fairness, without being too carried away with it, we are looking at pictures from a war zone this morning. Not a picture, something that looks like a war zone, looked like an old war zone, but is a picture of a current war zone in this endless battle between the United States and its enemies. Usually small groups of enemies. We're talking into countries to some extent here, but we're talking about the most unconventional form of warfare that man engages in, which is terrorism. Designed to cause terror, designed to have an impact on the psychology of Americans, designed to show that the United States is vulnerable. What better expresses American vulnerability than to watch these two symbols of American commerce and government and pride at the lower end of Manhattan collapsing in upon themselves after having been attacked by two hijacked aircraft. That is what it looks like at the moment. Looking out, this from the top of the ABC building, and we're like 60 blocks north, more than 60 blocks north of the trade centers, and as we look down, that's what they look like under normal circumstances. We can see them from almost anywhere in the city, and people go to the top of them on a regular basis so that they can see the huge surrounding area, including, I might add, right in their face, the Statue of Liberty on a day like today. And they are both gone. Now, just to deal with the possibility of the missing United Airlines flight, the mayor of Cleveland, Michael White, says that a Boeing 767 out of Boston has made an emergency landing at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport because of concerns that it may have a bomb aboard. There is some possibility that may be the missing United flight, but we do not know. But anybody who's in an aircraft this morning and made an emergency landing safely is probably one hugely relieved person at the moment. I want to go back to Washington. Claire Shipman is just across Lafayette Park from the White House. It's a traditional place in which we broadcast from when we're covering White House and Washington affairs. Claire, do we know where the president is at the moment?
Well, Peter, that's what we've been trying to figure out. I've been told by sources that Air Force One hasn't landed yet. What we're trying to figure out is, as you were talking about earlier, where that plane will land and where the president will go. The Secret Service have essentially told me, we have an emergency plan in place for exactly this sort of thing, and of course, we're not going to tell you where we take our protectees, including the president. And there was some question about whether he would even land, as he normally does, at Andrews Air Force Base. Now, there is a small press pool traveling with him on Air Force One. I've been told they may stick fairly close with him once he does land, so we may learn something more. But in addition, the entire staff of the White House and the old Executive Office building, State Department, has been scattered around town. There's no reaching anybody from the NSC, the press office. They're all trying to set up temporary offices, and at some point they may have them up and running. But right now, there's very little information about how this government is running and from where it's being run.
And of course, Claire, these are all really, truly important psychological factors in the war between the United States and those people who would harm it, because if the government is seen to be in, I don't mean to suggest disarray, but seen to be uncertain, then this is going to simply make America's enemies happier.
Oh, absolutely. This is exactly the sort of response they would like to have. And of course, this government doesn't make this sort of evacuation decision lightly. Remember what you were talking earlier about the Oklahoma City bombing. They didn't evacuate at that point. We all stayed in the White House because they didn't feel it was necessary, and they don't want to do it unless they believe it is absolutely necessary.
I have been saying, perhaps you will think too blithely, that the president is no safer than he is in the White House. Is that the conventional wisdom among the current White House press corps?
You mean...
That the president wants to be in the safest place, he's in the White House, unless he's in a bunker somewhere.
Well, I think that is normally true, but again, in a situation like this where it's obvious that they're just not sure what's going to happen, they believe there are safer places for him. The Secret Service told us absolutely they have places they believe are safer for their protectees than the White House. Remember, we talked about this earlier, but just a couple of years ago, a plane landed on the White House lawn.
Right.
So mistakes do happen in terms of the protection of the president, and they don't want to take any chances at this point.
Thanks very much, Claire. But one more question. We try to track the political leadership in the city generally, and I realize this is in large measure a serious effort, but also something of an academic exercise. Where are the leaders of the Senate and the House at the moment?
Well, we've been told that the leaders of the Senate, at least, have also been, according to a plan, taken to safe destinations, and we can't find out where. Colin Powell, we're told, is on his way back from Peru. He would also be taken to that sort of safe destination, presumably with the president.
Okay, thanks very much, Claire. People at home, I think, know by now that we get information from a variety of ways, and here's a piece of information about the president's advisors that Claire may or may not be party to, that they're preparing a list of options, including closing the nation's borders. Now, we all know, as the struggle over legal and illegal immigration and the desire that people have to come to the United States, how difficult that is. But the notion, we've now got all the airports in the country is closed down. We've got all the Canadian authorities pretty much mounting the same kind of operation there, at least temporarily, to see that nobody uses a Canadian airport in order to get an aircraft off the ground to come in this direction. Customs, U.S. Customs, has moved to something they call Threat Level 1, which is the highest state of alert that the Customs Department has, the Department of Treasury, of course, has. All air and marine assets are now on alert. We covered that before in terms of the state of the military. The borders are not closed And we are told by immigration and by customs at this point there have been no unusual incidents at any of the border crossings, either between the United States and Mexico or between the United States and Canada. And several, it seems like it's not very long ago, it's only been 3 hours, almost to the minute, since this actually happened. And early on, we made the observation that in some respects this was not in some respects, this is the most serious attack on the U.S. mainland since Pearl Harbor. And I notice now that at least one senator in Washington, Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, referring to that attack 60 years ago, which so surprised the nation, has now called this the second Pearl Harbor. And so much, of course, is different in the world, and yet one should not be surprised if this comes to be referred to that in the days and in the weeks ahead. We've managed to put together a couple of pieces of information on tape, and one of them is, I believe, a quick comment only from Mayor Giuliani of New York. Can we just roll that, please?
Hold on. Put your mask on. Put your mask on. I'll put it down.
Mayor, what's the situation right now?
The situation is that 2 airplanes have attacked apparently. Can't go to sleep. Why? You should not go to sleep. All right, well then let's go north then.
Can you tell us basically what happened to 2 airplanes? Stop it.
Come with us. Come with us. Well, let's talk a little later, okay?
Okay. City Hall. Okay.
You could never ever underestimate how important the political leaders are and their respective communities are to the country at this moment. Mayor Giuliani, who's coming to the end of his term in office, down there, very characteristic fashion of him, John Miller, to go immediately to the scene. Some mayors have not, and it has cost them politically, but you see in that early picture, maybe that's an hour or so ago, in which he's just caught above as much guard as anybody else.
And he's covered with dust. He's walking with his principal bodyguards. The other man wearing the mask, who stopped him from speaking, obviously for security reasons, wanting to get him further out of the area, was his police commissioner, Bernard Carrick, who, as the mayor was about to stop and give a briefing, said, no, we have to go further out, concerned for, other damage and his safety.
Okay, Senator Schumer of New York is, I believe, on the phone. Senator, are you there, and can I ask where you are?
Yeah, I am in Washington, Peter.
Good. Obviously, you, sir, have something to say, and here's the space.
Well, I just, we're all just totally shocked here. Probably there are millions of New Yorkers who are in my position. My wife works... I'm in Washington, but my wife works a quarter of a mile from the World Trade Center. My daughter goes to high school within the shadow of the World Trade Center.
Have you spoken to them both?
I did speak finally to my daughter. I spoke to my wife earlier this morning, and I spoke to my daughter about a half hour ago. Both were obviously extremely shaken by what's happened here.
Senator, you know precisely that 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center. There are 155 businesses in there, and 80,000 people visit the World Trade Center every day. Can you give us some sense of your feeling about the magnitude of this, your knowledge of the magnitude of this?
It leaves you almost speechless. I was going through each floor, and I know people on almost every other floor, and I'm sure that's true of so many people here. This is such a dastardly act aimed at the heart of America and the heart of New York, and it is... You don't even know what to think. It is just so awful.
Senator, I apologize for interrupting.
We're going to have to redouble our efforts because terrorism leaves nobody out.
Senator, I apologize for interrupting you. I really do. So this is an American Airlines news conference, which we do want to have. We'll come back to.
Not that I'm aware. We've been in business here 26 years, I guess. Have we ever done this, closed the air side to all the terminal buildings? This is unprecedented.
Yes, sir. We have not done it. It is this level of security has not happened before.
We hear from the aviation community that there is a rumor that military jets are escorting a commercial aircraft to this airport right now. Can either of you comment about that?
I would assume that since all of the aircraft that are due into DFW have landed, there are no military escorts. Now, whether there was a military escort provided to them or not, we're unaware of that.
We can take about 2 more questions, and we're going to have to...
Consideration for the implosion, wasn't even a carry on that.
We have canceled the implosion party set for this Saturday, and we will look at where we go from here.
On the flights that were diverted, where did they go?
Well, they could have gone a variety of places. We don't have all that specific information. Typically, when a plane is diverted, it's diverted to the Category X airport, the largest airport that is closest to where they're going, but we don't have specific information.
Planes on the ground right now that are sitting there on the runway. Any indication that perhaps terrorists would be one of those planes?
Have no idea whatsoever.
Now, when you say shutting down the airside, can you just articulate that a little more?
Certainly.
Is this the... Just tell us what you mean by that.
Right. What that means is when you go through your security checkpoint for those customers who are used to going to the airport, anything on the opposite side of that is called that secure side of the airport. And those are the areas that are being closed to the public. They are still keeping open those areas in front of that. They call that the ATO area, or where you can check your bags, that sort of thing, to accommodate any customers' questions and things that might find their way to the airport.
So all folks who are stranded are being moved out, essentially?
Indeed, and being accommodated, those, based upon what the plans are by their respective air carriers, be accommodated in local hotels and things of that nature.
That's all. I'm sorry. One more question, and we're going to have to get back to our business.
I talked with passengers out in the terminal. They said that people who were coming off the planes are having their bags searched or their luggage that comes out of scary.
That's possible.
That is possible on the part of the air carrier.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back to you. I think the most important thing to take away is that there is no specific threat to this airport, and rest assured that our DPS folks will keep you alerted if anything else is to occur. Thank you.
What time should we expect another?
Well, there you hear the comments from two officials. I have to be perfectly honest, not sure who they are, whether they work for American Airlines or they work for the airport in Dallas, but they were in Dallas today, and they say at the end of that news conference there is no specific threat to that airport, which will be reassuring to people who are around the airport, but anybody who's wanting to fly anywhere in the country at the moment is unable to do so anyway. But the conditions in the country are of such a confusing nature at the moment that stuff just comes in all the time. We've had authorities in Lexington.
I'm Del Walters inside the ABC7 News Studios, joined with Carol Costello. We want to update you on the events that are occurring here locally. There are two major things we must deal with at this time. We know now, and we have been reporting throughout the morning, that one of the planes involved was Flight 77, that was a Boeing 757 operating out of Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. 58 passengers on board. We're trying to get information regarding that. Also, there's a situation on the Pentagon.
We should mention the number right now. If you believe you have loved ones on board that American Airlines flight, that is number 77. American Airlines has provided us a number. It is 1-800-245-0999. Another note, American Airlines has shut down its operations. Do not go to the airport. Do not try to call the airline. They will not answer you.
We want to now bring you up to date on the situation at the Pentagon. If we could take that shot that we just saw a second ago. There is still smoke pouring from within inside the Pentagon. We know that the plane that crashed into the Pentagon penetrated the outer wall and crashed into the inner wall. We have received so far reports from one hospital, the Virginia Hospital Center, that as many as 22 people have been brought there. No other reports of injuries or casualties at this point.
Although we do hear from ABC News that there is extensive damage at the Pentagon, we also understand that the highest-ranking officials were not on that side of the building, but there were high-ranking officials located where that plane went through the building. Again, we do believe there have been deaths. We just don't know yet, and of course we'll keep you posted on that.
ABC7 News reporter Sam Ford is standing by live at Gravelly Point. Sam, can you bring us up to date as to what the situation is there? I understand a plane actually just landed at National.
Yes, Del. Well, as you can say, over 2 hours now, we've been looking at this plume of smoke from across those trees. That is the area of the Pentagon. And as you said, there was a plane that landed here. The National Airport has been shut down. One plane came down, a small plane there. It looks like some sort of a Learjet, and it was escorted by a fighter jet, I guess, to make sure that it wasn't shot down. The speculation is that it is some VIP who had reason to be here, and therefore the plane was brought in, although the airport itself is shut down. And we'll just give you a live picture there of the National Airport. If you can just, that is the tape picture, and that is the live picture. That is the live picture of National Airport. All the planes there at National are shut down at this point. And we've been here sort of watching refugees, you might say, who have been moving along the George Washington Parkway past the airport because so many of the roadways are closed down. Here are some of the people we talked to today. Tell us what happened.
My friend sent me an email saying that what's up with their airlines. We were like, what are you talking about? And all I know is heard a big old boom, like the ground was shaking, and then he hasn't sent anything else. And one of my friends went down to the concourse. I think like she's hurt.
Did you all hear the noise and then?
Yes, sir.
Immediately they evacuated us. We left the Pentagon. We passed most of the kids in the nursery, and they were fine. They were keeping them together. We got on this path, and we were trying to walk down to Old Town, but they just closed the path by National Airport. So they told us to wait here for about 30 minutes.
And of course, those are people there who are evacuating, walking away from the Pentagon. What the colonel that we spoke to said that he walked 2.5 miles. They're being blocked. People can't get from here to there, so they're just having to walk around trying to find a way out of this place because of all the road blockages, because of the emergency situation over here on this side of the river. And of course, it's a situation where Metro is still running, but airports are closed, all airports around the country. And also there has been a considerable rush hour as much of the government has shut down and people have left the city.
Sam, we have breaking news, though. We want to interrupt you for just a minute. The National Guard, Troop 372 out of the district, please report to duty. Your services are sorely needed. We also have information about a United flight that has been missing. We understand it has now crashed. We do not know where, rather. United has just confirmed that for us, though.
And we understand that obviously thousands of you in the area are waiting for your loved ones to come home. We want to bring you up to date on what's going on with the transportation situation. First of all train service in and out of Union Station has been suspended until further notice. Also, we are receiving reports that people are making their way out of the district. And at this point, it's safe to say that all of the roads leading out, we're in one of those situations where it's sort of like the rush hour during one of the winter snows, where all of the lanes are being directed out of the city. Sometimes at some intersections, police are ordering the traffic to continue on, but at other intersections, we are telling you to remain calm because that is about the only way that everyone will get to and from. We want to check in right now with ABC 7 News' Nancy Weiner with more on the transportation situation. Nancy?
Good morning, Dell. Well, we have been here at the corner of Independence Avenue at the Ellipse for many hours now, and for most of the time, the traffic has looked like this, basically at a standstill in both directions. Right now, you do see a little bit of traffic moving in the westbound direction, but traffic been very, very heavy for hours. I want to take you on a little tour of our location. The Ellipse has been closed for about the past hour and a half. When Secret Service showed up, we saw a number of officers showed up. They donned flak jackets, and they told everyone who was standing on the Ellipse to get off of it. Past us, you can see the White House, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it from our cameras, but there has been a vastly noted increase in security on the White House grounds, both on the South Lawn and on the roof of the White House. Now, when this all first happened, hundreds of people began gathering on the Ellipse, both tourists and people who had been evacuated from their buildings. They were coming up to us, asking us if we knew what was going on, and at times, dozens of people were actually gathered around our monitors. As you can imagine, a lot of tourists here on the mall, a number of people we spoke to who are from New York City who wanted to know what was going on with their loved ones there. Now, as far as traffic is concerned, we do have some information to tell you about if you are trying to get out of town. Right now, the 14th Street Bridge is closed, and afternoon traffic patterns have all inbound bridges are closed and outbound are open. That is the latest information that we are getting right now. Of course, there is quite a lot of people trying to get out of the district right now. What we can also tell you is that there's an afternoon traffic pattern in effect on the Rock Creek Parkway, which means that all lanes are going northbound. D.C. police right now are suggesting that people who want to get out of town take the Southeast Freeway. Canal Road also one way outbound right now, and as I said, the inbound lanes on bridges are closed, outbound is open, and as you mentioned, Union Station is closed as well, and of course 395 near the Pentagon closed also. That's the latest from here, reporting live from the Ellipse. I'm Nancy Weiner, ABC 7 News.
Nancy, we also want to, thank you very much, but we also want to remind our audience that there is something you can do. We have received word from several area hospitals now, and indeed the Red Cross, that they are concerned now about blood shortages. So if you want to do something, if you feel like you're helpless at home and you want to know what can I do besides watch television, you can go out and you can donate blood at this point, because obviously based on the simple numbers alone, there are 20,000 people who work inside the Pentagon. Casualties could be, and I emphasize once again at this point, could be large.
And another breaking news event to tell you about. All federal offices are now closed. Federal courthouses, rather, are closed, and offices in Virginia, in Delaware, in Maryland, in Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Also, a word from D.C. police: do not call 911 in the city. Do not call 911. They are overloaded. The number to call right now, 311. Number of schools also closed down in our area. Let's go to Greta Cruz in our newsroom now.
Okay, thank you very much, Carol and Dell. Before we get to the schools, I just want to mention something. Nancy Weiner was talking about transportation. As far as Metro goes, we are told the subways are running. However, the following stations are closed. Pentagon Station, Union Station, and the National Airport stations are closed. The trains are running through, but they're not stopping. Also, the Yellow Line from Huntington is switching routes to run through Arlington Cemetery out to the Stadium Armory. As for the bus service on Metro, we are told it is running, but of course traffic is clogged as people try to get out of the city, so there are delays and it is a mess. Let's get on to the schools now. These keep changing. We do have them that we can run down for you. Here we go. Arlington County Public Schools are open. However, if parents want to pick their kids up early, they may go to the school and do so. Prince George's County Public Schools will be closing 2 hours early today. D.C. Public Schools are open. However, the officials have asked parents to please try and go pick up your children as soon as possible. Montgomery County Schools closing 1.5 hours early. Edison Friendship Public Charter School closing at 12:30. Charles County Public Schools are open, closing normal times. Loudoun County the same, and Alexandria Schools also open as well. Moving on now to university closings, American University is closed. The University of Maryland College Park is open. However, the University College campus is closed. George Washington University is closed. Catholic University is closed. UDC is closed. Georgetown Law School, we are told, is now closed. And that is it as far as we have. These things will be changing throughout the day. A number of the schools, I should mention, even though they are still open, the public schools, they have canceled evening and afternoon activities, so you will want to check with that.
Yeah, and I can imagine many parents want their kids out of schools, but absolutely calm is the word of the day right now. Right. Thank you, Greta.
And we want to also bring you up to date and to give you that number again from American Airlines. Undoubtedly, many of you are at home, you're watching, and you're wondering about the loved ones who may have been on one of those flights. This is the information number that American Airlines has given out. It is 1-800-245-0999. We know of 4 planes that appear to have been involved at this point in this terrorist attack. One was an American Airlines Flight 11, a Boeing 767 from Boston to L.A. The flight had 81 passengers on board, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Also involved was Flight 77, that is a Boeing 757 that operated here out of Washington Dulles to Los Angeles with 58 passengers on board, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. That's 156 people on board those 2 planes.
Yeah, the others involved are United flights, United Flight 43 going from Newark to San Francisco, also United Flight 175. Boston to L.A., we believe that that has now crashed, but we do not know where. And of course, there's a 5th plane involved that crashed into the Pentagon, a smaller plane.
We have ABC 7 news crews out throughout the region. We are efforting information on the situation at local hospitals. We are efforting the information that is unfolding at the Pentagon, and also with regards to the national security of Washington, D.C. itself. As that information becomes available, we will re-interrupt ABC News, but right now, back to ABC News and Peter Jennings.
Engaged in a war now with the Israeli government, has also reacted very quickly to this today to express, to be perfectly honest, I haven't heard what he said, but so let's hear what he said now. This is Palestinian President Yasser Arafat. Now, that's the Palestinian President, Chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, who, as I think everybody who watches the news or reads the news these days understands, is in a very, very bitter war with the Israelis. and in which terrorism has been a factor. Palestinians see what the Israelis do to them as terrorism, and certainly the Israelis and much of the world see the Palestinian and other suicide bombers who've attacked inside Israel to be terrorism of the most gruesome order, no question about that. And so we should not be surprised, as on previous circumstances, to see Chairman Arafat expressing his condolences, but other Palestinians who believe the United States is responsible for what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, or at least complicit and is certainly supplying the Israelis arms, will be happy to see this attack on the United States today. So take a look at a scene from Jerusalem not too long ago in which there is some celebration that the powerful United States has been harmed, has been seen to be vulnerable, has been hurt, I suppose, in the broadest sense of the word. And the people who go off to do this sort of thing, both in the Middle East now, you must remember that a vast majority of the population of the Middle East now in all countries is under 21, much of it under 15, certainly under 17, and the kind of tensity and intention, if one presumes this terrorism, one shouldn't, this terrorism has had its genesis or had its roots somewhere in the Middle East, or at least in people who are opposed, are just brimming with anger at the United States. And we are now becoming more experienced with the notion that there are young men, for the most part, who are prepared to blow themselves up along with everybody else in terms if they can be a service to the cause. And they believe, as to some people believe about Islam, that they will, by sacrificing themselves, go on to another place. It's an unfair comment on Islam in some respects, but it is certainly a motivating factor. The hatred of the United States, and the hatred of the United States is a hatred of Israel. Whether you're from Afghanistan, or whether you're from Iran, Iraq, or inside the Palestinian territories, is so intense at some levels, and has become more intense in recent months, that very many people will not be surprised at this attack today, though, like everybody else, will be amazed at the magnitude and success of it. John McCarthy at the Pentagon. John.
Peter, we are standing outside the Pentagon at this point. It has been already a long morning for rescue workers and police here. One eyewitness I talked to, who was on this busy highway outside the Pentagon this morning, said he saw an airplane coming directly over his head. It was an American Airlines plane. He could see the number on the plane. He could almost see the passengers inside as it went along the highway, started clipping off the high wires and the different light poles along the highway, and slammed directly into the side of the Pentagon. As we said earlier, Peter, the aircraft penetrated deep inside the Pentagon. It is organized in rings from the E ring on the outside. It penetrated all the way into the A ring in the inner part of the Pentagon. After it burned for a number of minutes, a part of the building collapsed. By the time rescue workers could get in there, the destruction was just terrific.
So John, do you have any sense of the casualties?
We don't have any sense, Peter, except the size of the medical operation that has been set up here is enormous. They are anticipating the casualties. Certainly the injured will be in the hundreds. I certainly don't want to speculate on those killed.
And John, it's a little hard to get a sense of the size sometimes for the picture. Can you describe, maybe in feet or in yards, how big a penetration this is?
The roof has collapsed, Peter. There is a chasm in the side of the Pentagon that is probably 200 or 300 feet across. From the roof of the Pentagon, there is this huge V shape that has collapsed. You can see deep inside the Pentagon from the street now.
This is into the inner courtyard of the Pentagon itself.
It's into the innermost ring of the Pentagon, Peter. I have not been able to get into the courtyard, but I was told that the penetration was all the way into the deepest ring of the Pentagon.
And John, the office building, the Pentagon is about, what, 6 stories high?
It's 5 stories above ground, Peter, and several stories below. Clearly the damage is primarily above ground, but also some of those in the lower offices. I was sitting in the Pentagon when the attack happened. I was on the opposite side of the building. It shook the entire building. It was very clear that something terrible had happened. There was chaos immediately after the attack, Peter. Secretary of Defense, I walked out with the Deputy Secretary of Defense. The Marine Corps Commandant couldn't get out the door because security had locked it. It was chaos.
Okay, John, and the fires are still burning at the moment, we believe?
They are still burning. They are mostly oil fires, it appears, Peter. The fire hoses have been on the various fires for the last several hours, so they're beginning to put them out. But obviously there is still heavy gray smoke coming out of that portion of the Pentagon that was so terribly damaged.
John, there are a couple of aircraft at least around the country today which are still unaccounted for. You gave a very clear description earlier of how this aircraft had approached the Pentagon. But did anybody able to identify it as an aircraft associated with an airline?
Absolutely, Peter. The eyewitness I talked to looked up and said it was an American Airlines plane. I saw it clear as could be. It went right over the top of my car and clipped a pole right in front of where my car was.
Thank you very much, John McCarthy. I actually think that you may have said that earlier, and I simply lost it in terms, just lost it. And so we now know that it was, from at least one eyewitness there, it was an American Airlines aircraft which crashed into the Pentagon. So let me just try to get some grasp on the airplane. We have two United flights, a 757, which was on its way from New York to San Francisco, which crashed near Pittsburgh. We have a United flight which crashed from Boston to Los Angeles, United 175, and we do not know where that aircraft has crashed or been crashed as of now. And we have these two American flights, one from Boston to Los Angeles, which is a 767 with 81 passengers and 11 crew on board. We're talking about almost 100 people on American Flight 11. And American Flight 77, which was scheduled from Washington to Los Angeles, with 58 passengers and 6 crew members on board. And John Miller and I have been sitting here looking at each other about where these flights were going. And there's several ways to speculate about it, but you came up with one very interesting on already.
From a forensic standpoint, if you look operationally to crash these flights, it would have been just as simple to get on the Washington shuttle or the New York shuttle and crash one into the Trade Center and the other in the Pentagon. The choice of flights here, Newark to San Francisco, Boston to L.A., Dulles to L.A.
Excuse me, John, I apologize. Let me come back just because we have the New York governor here.
Sure.
Governor George Pataki, the governor of New York, I believe, is on the telephone or somewhere. Governor Pataki, do you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I hear you fine.
Well, why don't you first start off, sir, and give us your appraisal of the day so
Well,
far.
it's just a horrific scene, and everybody's pulling together. We're activating the state emergency forces, but our hearts and prayers are with the victims and the families of those victims, and we have to, at this point, just focus on trying to help as many people whose lives are at risk as possible and dealing with those who have been injured.
Do you have some sense of the magnitude of casualties?
We don't want to quantify a number, but obviously it's a horrific incident that really is just an incredible outrage against the people of New York and the people of America. But at this point, our focus is on trying to make sure that those whose lives are still at risk are as protected, and those who have been injured are treated as quickly and as well as possible.
Governor, do you believe that thousands of people have been killed?
I don't want to use a number, Peter. At this point, the goal is simply to try to help as many people as possible. We're working closely with the city, with our National Guard forces coming in to help relieve the city police and fire. Obviously, it's a situation that just cries out for people to be horrified, but what we have to do at this point is focus on helping those who are at risk, helping those who have been injured, making sure there's an orderly removal from lower Manhattan, and that is our focus at this point.
Governor, are you in a position to go to the scene? Are you in a position to go to lower Manhattan? Do you think you should? Would you like to? Or are you locked down?
No, I'm in the city, but the important thing is to be able to stay in contact with the White House, with City Hall, with our statewide emergency services. We've gotten offers of support from all the surrounding states with their emergency services, and the critical thing right now is to be able to coordinate to make sure that the response is the strongest and the most compassionate it can be for the people whose lives are still at risk. And we're mobilizing National Guard units from across the state. We're getting help from the surrounding states and coordinating with the city, and that's what we have to do at this point.
Governor, what have you done down about the other so-called high-profile potential targets in New York City, like the UN and the bridges and things like this? Are they all evacuated and locked down now?
UN's evacuated. The tunnels have been closed. The George Washington Bridge is open under security for emergency services coming in and people going out. We've shut down most of the mass transit. Grand Central is open under very tight security, but people who pass through the security have limited service to the northern suburbs, and we're doing the same thing on Long Island. But the important thing now is to provide as much help as quickly and as effectively to those whose lives are at risk or those who've been injured, and we're working with the city and federal officials to make sure that happens.
Do you believe that New York City is now under control?
New York City has been under attack, and until we get through this, we just have to continue to respond as strongly as we can.
And are you in a profile now? Are you in a position where you actually think there's a potential for more?
We just don't know. That's why we have to not only help those who have been injured, but also take every security step we can to try to prevent further incidents. We just don't know, Peter.
Okay. Governor Pataki, thank you very much. Governor George Pataki of New York, who is in New York City, which of course is where he probably belongs at a moment like this. Downtown Manhattan is saying simply that the National Guard has been called in, the tunnels are closed, the George Washington Bridge, which is across, which goes across the Hudson River from the west side of Manhattan into New Jersey. Just remember, a large segment of many thousands of people from New Jersey work in New York, and there's tremendous commerce back and forth on a daily basis. That has all been brought to a help. It's interesting to recall, John Miller, that the attack on the trade towers in '93 was launched from New Jersey, or at least the operational headquarters of the people who attacked the Trade Center were in New Jersey.
Correct. And the building of the bomb and the original conspiracy was all carried out in towns right across the river. In fact, the conspirators later admitted that they watched from New Jersey to see if the buildings would in fact fall, and they didn't. This time they did.
They did today. And Governor Pataki trying, as politicians again must on occasions like this, trying to express the horror and the commitment that the political establishment feels to those people who've died and those people who need to be rescued. Notice, in answer to every question about whether or not something was locked down or something, he came back every time that their priority now is to try to help those people who are in deep and, in some cases, still desperate trouble. George Stephanopoulos, one of our senior reporters, is downtown. Hey, George, where have you been? What have you seen? What do you think?
Well, Peter, I'm going to give you kind of a pool report from several of our correspondents down here of basically what happened down here in downtown New York between 9:45 and 10:45 when the two explosions and the collapse of the World Trade Center happened. At the time, I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped. They then diverted us around the World Trade Center to Park Place, which is one stop beyond the World Trade Center. We got to that train station at around 10:35, Peter, and it was a scene unlike I've ever seen before in my entire life. As we tried to get out of the subway station and walk up into the street, it was pitch black, midnight black, snowing soot all down through downtown Manhattan. This was about 2 blocks from the World Trade Center. You couldn't see a foot in front of your face at that time. We then worked our way back uptown. All of the firefighters and police officials and National Guard are now evacuating everyone out of lower Manhattan. They're going east towards Brooklyn and north, which is where we are now, up on Canal Street. I should add as well, Peter, we had one of our reporters was downtown and had a sight line of the World Trade Center at around 9:48, which is around the time I believe the first tower collapsed, Gloria Rivera, and she saw 2, then 3, then 4 people jump out of the top floors of the World Trade Center. She was with a firefighter who said, they're not falling, they're jumping. Watch their arms waving, and they counted 12 people jump off the top floors.
Do you want to continue, George?
Well, right now, as I said, they are evacuating everyone else out. But just to give you another sense, Peter, all over lower Manhattan, the sidewalks, the streets are covered with about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of dust, of soot, as if it were Pompeii. Most people are pretty calm right now. They're evacuating slowly as the firefighters come in. But it really was one of the most frightening, horrific scenes I've ever seen in my life.
Thanks, George, very much. Come back anytime with a report. I just, as you were concluding there, watching these guys go up that escalator, and if it's in the World Trade Center, we assume that we know that their cameraman got out, but we don't know about anybody else because, you know, within an hour and something of the time these two attacks had occurred, these two buildings had completely disappeared, and you begin increasingly to see more dramatic footage. George Stephanopoulos made a reference to Pompeii near Naples on the west coast of Italy, which was, you know, buried by a volcano, and you get exactly that same sense of freezing stuff in soot and dirt as might have occurred by a volcano. Jim Kallstrom, with whom we're long familiar, former official of the FBI in the New York office, is on the air, very deeply involved in the Flight TWA 800 investigation. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What do you think?
Peter?
I'm listening, Jim. I
Yes.
just say, what do you think? I mean, just start and I'll...
Well, my first thought is with the tremendous casualties, and the death toll is just overwhelming. It's a day that 50 years from now, our children, if we're still teaching history, will be taught about when we went to war on American soil with terrorism.
Jim, if you had a chance to talk to your more active colleagues in the FBI at the moment about what they're doing at the moment, whether they're able to, I mean, it seems the hardest thing at the moment is to make an appraisal of all this. It just happened, and it's just, in some respects, it's happened and it's happening, right?
Peter, you're right. I mean, it happened. It's shocking, but in some ways it isn't shocking. I mean, we've had, you know, the hatred of America played out at the Trade Center in '93. They tried to take the Trade Center down. We've had the hatred played out in the USS Cole, the bombings of our embassies in Africa, the bombings of the barracks in Saudi Arabia. So now it's being played out big time here in the United States.
Jim, what is the principal goal of the FBI at a moment like this, when all of the emergency services are brought to bear in all of these locations? What's the FBI actually doing at the moment?
I think the first concern of the FBI right now, right this second, is there going to be something else happening in the next 5 minutes, 30 minutes, hour, 12 hours? Simultaneous with that, who did it? Where are they? What do we know? What's the intelligence base? Tell us. Why didn't we see this coming? Where do we go from here? What kind of articulate, defined information can we give the National Command Authority so that we can bring the necessary massive retaliation necessary without a lot of collateral damage?
Well, Jim, thank you very much for checking in with us, and please do at any time if you have news. That photo, as Jim was talking, Jim Kallstrom, the former director of the FBI here, and a major force in the investigation of TWA 800, which blew up off the south coast of Long Island.
And the principal operator in the first World Trade Center bombing. Key investigator.
Right. But it's interesting, forgive me, no offense intended him, he doesn't have much to say either today, because in some respects there isn't much to say except the horror of it. But as we were looking at just a moment ago, listening to George Stephanopoulos talking to our reporters who witnessed the horrifying jump of some people from the top of the trade towers, you just saw a hint of the just ahead of this little piece of video here before, you saw a hint of what people were enduring at the top of the trade towers before they collapsed as a result of the intensity of the fire. And we've seen it before in other places around the world. Fire starts in a place, people often, ironically, not that it would have made any difference today, do the wrong thing, they get trapped in an open window by fire coming into their room, and finally they just jump, simply because if they don't jump, they're probably going to be burned alive. But as we have heard from, it's interesting that Governor Pataki is so nervous, and I don't blame him for a second, wanting to stay away from the magnitude of the casualties here today. But as John McKenzie reported from the fire department downtown, we got 200 fire department officials, 200 firefighters missing. I don't know whether or not this is a firefighter who's been brought, but you see in every case people getting oxygen, because it isn't if it isn't collapse that kills in some cases like this, it is the deadly smoke. Anybody who's been involved in a fire knows the deadly smoke which suffocates people in a circumstance like this. But we're only getting touches, and it doesn't even have the chaos associated with it in many cases. We're just getting touches now of what has happened in these variety of places. The Pentagon are being kept, quite logically, I think, back at some distance. And in downtown, what's happened is that camera crews were downtown. I fear, to be perfectly honest, for some of the camera crews who work nothing braver than a cameraman either, who goes right in when something has happened and may indeed have been at some of those places. And it certainly takes time for video to get back from a location like this so that we get a widening appreciation of what has happened. But as I said, it's very hard to try to get some grasp now on the number of casualties. So we can do, in some cases, not more than just tell you how this is in terms of the whole country. The North American Air Defense Command, NORAD, is on the highest state of alert. And you had just made references earlier in the morning how the United States and Canada have cooperated in trying to keep the airports locked down. Last there was another aircraft on the air, but John, talk to me about this for a second, and then we'll come to this business about fuel. Sure. You know, the North American Air Defense Command was a great factor in our lives in the 1960s.
In the Cold War, yes.
Exactly. During the Cold War, it's up along the Northwest Territories and some of the independent areas of the North. Nobody thinks about it anymore, and here it is on a state of alert today.
No, but you factor that in, and evincing so many images that Americans are uncomfortable with. The idea that there's a no-fly zone in New York City, in Manhattan, being patrolled by F-16s with instructions to shoot down any errant aircraft. That the same is true in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. That military people and doctors and military vehicles are coming to aid. That the National Guard is on alert. You know, the kind of images that used to only exist in the fantasies of 7 days in May, where, you know, the Army would take to the streets, which has not happened yet. They've offered assistance and military logistical assistance. But that kind of thing that Americans are so uncomfortable with unfolding here.
And I realize, by the way, just as you mentioned it, something else is very important at the moment. And again, I don't mean to say this in melodramatic terms. Where is the President of the United States? The President of the United States led, I know we don't know where he is, but pretty soon the country needs to know where he is. And it seems to, I think, for me anyway, I apologize, the President needs to talk to us. He left Florida a couple of hours ago. Our people in Washington are clearly listening and checking this as best they can. But one of the important factors at the moment is that the political leadership in the country be present, as Governor Pataki was. Mayor Giuliani of New York made an appearance on the street and was caught unawares like everybody else, but Governor Pataki came out and basically told the citizenry of New York in a variety of different ways, I assume, just exactly what they're trying to do. Now, here's a bulletin about the President's whereabouts. The President is about to make a statement at Barksdale Air Force Base shortly. Barksdale Air Force Base is in Louisiana. So if this is accurate, and we'll check with Claire Shipman and our other reporters at the White House, and John Cochran, if he can, in Florida at the moment, who's with the President today. The President's not coming back to Washington at the moment. We'll leave that for just a second. We'll talk a little more about this business of the aircraft and the fuel. We're trying to figure out why would a plane going from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Los Angeles be involved in this? It could have been any plane, though, right?
It could have been, but when you consider the advantage to a terrorist, here you have a transnational flight. It's going to be a larger aircraft in each case, but, and this is the key, because we had speculated earlier, was there some additional explosives laden in these planes to cause these incredibly large explosions? It appears who's ever planned this has picked cross-country flights that would have the maximum amount of fuel you could carry on a domestic flight. Flights going from one end of the country to the other. The kind of jet that if you slammed into a building would ensure the maximum fire and explosion possible from any flight that you could have chosen. Again, Newark to San Francisco, Boston to L.A., Dulles to Los Angeles, Washington to L.A., Boston to L.A. The planes that are being looked at in this attack today were apparently, or you could speculate, chosen to give the terrorists the very biggest bang for their effort.
And it's a very interesting point you make, because again, our assumptions tend to go when we see huge explosions like this. understanding visually the power of explosives, that there were explosives on board, and so you're quite right. It may indeed have been the aircraft explosion.
I mean, John Nance could help us with this, but when you hear the amount of fuel, very flammable aeronautical fuel that's loaded onto a plane for a 3,000-mile trip or something, that's going to give you quite an explosion. Flight 800, which was an international flight, to those who saw it, was an incredible explosion.
John, if you'd sit at your station for a second, I'm just going to go and try to check one piece of information, and in that period of time, we're going to try to give you a little better sense of the disaster at the trade towers today. Here's something we've compiled, and we compile it as we go along.
I was standing next to One World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden I heard rumbling, and we all started running away from it. The glass blew out and threw me onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't see for 20 seconds. And then I started seeing vaguely the street, and I just started walking, and my eyesight came back.
I see you're bloody. You have dust all over you.
Yeah, it was bad. It was like a dust storm or something. I couldn't see anything.
How badly are you hurt?
I have no idea.
As soon as he got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
We just come out of Tower 1. We're walking towards Broadway.